St. in Switzerland, the venue for the BMW IBSF Bobsleigh Skeleton and Parasport World Championships for 2023. Let's take a look at this legendary track. It's got a long, shallow descent down into turn 1. Very enticing to run it all the way in, but that's a problem because you hit the little first dink and skid all the way down these two very flat straights. Tiny little second kink in between. Then the first corner with the name. This year, very tricky. 3 pressures. 1, 2, and then the third kicker in wall. Tap on the left maybe, down into snake 1 and snake 2. Down into sunny corner, usually the sunniest part of the track, and then down through Nash and Dixon, the pair of corners named after the 64 Olympic champions from the St. Bob Club. The signature corner, horseshoe, slingshotting down, avoiding a big hit into Telephone and Shamrock. Then another tricky part, Devil's Dyke. 1, 2, 3 pressures, avoid skidding here, through Nameless, down into Tree, Bridge, under the bridge into Leap, about 90 miles an hour down the straight, out to Gunter Sachs, into the final corners, Martineau, over the Cresta run, try and avoid a tap, into Portago, and wait for the finish line, across you go, to complete the most iconic course on the planet. The first week of action had started with skeleton. In the men's competition, Great Britain's Craig Thompson had lain 5th overnight on a sled that he'd never raced before, with just 6 practice trips and 2 runs in the first day. On heat 3, he moved up into the bronze medal position. He was in unexplored territory, challenging here through the forest, but a rub down the wall robbed him of vital speed. And at the line, it was a tantalising 100th of a second behind Jung Seung-gui for the bronze medal. Into the final 2 sleds, and the big revelation of the World Championships, without any question, the performance of the young Italian Amedeo Banis. The 23-year-old had never previously been in the top 6, even in a World Championship outing, and yet from the very first heat, he was a definite medal contender. Second fastest in the field. In the first heat, he held the silver medal position overnight, and as he put Jung behind him, guaranteed himself and Italy their first ever World Championship medal. 1 sled to go. Unbelievably, Amedeo Banis led the race. Italy had made history. Could Great Britain's Matt Weston do the same? 3 World Cup victories under his belt this season from a career total of 4. He's on an absolute high. 2 race wins in Altenburg in success leading into St. Moritz, including the European Championship gold. But the last man to win on this track from Great Britain was back in 2008, Kristen Bromley, who was also then the European and the World Champion. Matt Weston led all the way through all 4 heats to claim the gold medal, the first British man to do so since 2008, and he seems unstoppable. In the women's skeleton competition that followed the men, Janine Flock was looking for the medals as well. After 3 heats, just 100th ahead of Canada's Mimi Reneva. Reneva had laid down an absolutely smoking final run on a track where she has previously won 2 of her World Cup career victories. Flock was never looking in contention, and she dropped away rapidly. Fastest in the second heat on day 1, she couldn't find that sprinkle of magic again on day 2, and at the line she knew that she was out of the medals. As we got to the final 2 sleds, her teammate Jen Charnell had dropped out of medal contention with a loose 4th run. But Kimberly Boss had driven herself from 5th place overnight into the silver medal position with a great 3rd heat, and the 4th looked to be just as strong. 2 little mistakes down in the fast part of the track. She still had plenty of speed on board. She would comfortably be the race leader with just 1 slider remaining. The Olympic bronze medalist from Beijing, to the delight of her mum and dad, had the lead and was guaranteed a medal. Susanne Kreher of Germany Her home track in Altenburg, her first senior world championship appearance, though she's raced in St. Moritz in 2 junior worlds, taking a bronze and a silver. She led after the first heat, and after the second, and after the third. And if she had nerves, they didn't show until late in the run, and then suddenly mistakes crept in. The gap was tiny, the speed was good, it was impossible to tell who was going to take it to the 100th of a second, Kimberly Boss or Suzanne Kreher, and it was the young German in her first senior world championship that saved German blushes. The men had misfired horribly, the women had had a disaster. Suzanne Kreher, the world champion, single-handedly rescued their skeleton weekend. The newest Olympic discipline, the mixed teams competition for skeleton, now boasts a reaction start for the athletes. Brogan Crowley, who finished 18th, and Craig Thompson, who was 100th out of the medals in the men's competition. For Brogan, a chance for redemption, and with a fast start and a really nice-looking run, she seized it with both hands. In a head-to-head against Valentina Margallo, who had finished 4 spots ahead of her, she thrashed her by 0.4 of a second. And that meant that Craig Thompson, on a brand new sled who was only 100th out of the medals in the men's competition, would have a cushion. He didn't need it. On a sled that he'd never raced before the St. Moritz weekend, he was absolutely flying again. The 30-year-old, with a 4th best position in the men's competition, put his team into the leaders' box with a hope of a medal. They remained the leaders as their teammates Laura Dees and Matt Weston came to the line. Laura Dees, the Olympic bronze medalist in 2018 in women's skeleton, was back to something approaching her previous best in the women's competition, finishing in 9th. Before the midway point, she had taken the lead by just a whisker. So what would the newly crowned world champion do? Matt Weston made a good reaction to the lights and had a very quick start. It would turn out to be the fastest in the competition. But below Horseshoe, 3 critical errors, robbing the sled of speed. It would be enough to put their teammates behind at the line. Was it enough for gold?
Not the best run, but...
GB remained 1-2 as we got to our final team. The first of the German duos had dropped by the wayside as we got to Suzanne Kreher, the women's gold medalist, teamed up with Christopher Groothair, a double world and Olympic champion. Kreher, as she had done in the singles competition, absolutely flew down the St. Moritz ice. Whatever else was going on with their skeleton team, nothing affected her. She took the advantage, and it was up to Christopher Groothair to convert it. Groothair has not been in the best of form here in St. Moritz, but in the final slide of the competition for the skeleton Olympic champion, he finally pulled it out of the bag, drawing level and clinching gold by 1300ths. Germany continue with their skeleton team gold run, their 3rd in a row. The first week in St. Moritz wasn't just about skeleton, there was bobsleigh action too, with the 2nd ever Women's Monobob Worlds. In the bronze medal position, she has 1 medal in World Cup racing in her monobob career, yet to really unlock the key to success. But the Olympic champion in 2018 as a push athlete has been driving for the very first time in public this year and is really starting to rack up the results. With a bronze medal tucked under her belt overnight, she solidified her position with the 4th heat and confirmed herself as a podium finisher for the very first time as a driver in the World Championships. A huge moment for Lisa Buchwitz. Would it be a huge moment for the reigning world and Olympic monobob champion Kaylee Humphries? A multiple world champion and 2-time Olympic champion in women's bob, she is also the top scorer over the last 2 seasons in the mono. But an unfortunate 3rd heat and not the tidiest 4th meant that she slipped further away from the lead. A drift down the straight on her final run meant that Kaylee would take at least a silver medal, but she would need the overnight leader Lara Nolter to make big errors to give her the gold. So the pressure was on Nolter. Fourth in the Olympic Games in the Monobob, though she took the women's bobsleigh gold, Nolte has struggled in the early part of this season to get to grips with the lighter sled. But all of that changed on her first trip to Lake Placid in December. She took gold then and has not been off the podium since. And on perhaps the toughest version of this hand-built track in years, Lara Nolte never looked back. She was fastest in the first, second, third and fourth heats to claim a comfortable World Championship gold. And after the disappointment of the Monobob Olympic competition, she was delighted. And perhaps the most eagerly anticipated clash of the entire fortnight, the two-man competition. Fastest man in the first of the four heats had been Switzerland's Mickey Vogt. He'd been in third place overnight, challenging Francesco Friedrich and the leader Johannes Lochner. But Friedrich and Vogt had slipped back to a phenomenal run from Lochner in the third heat. Now it was all about trying to take silver from the reigning and seven-time world champion Francesco Friedrich. Vogt with the fastest speed down the run. He'd done what he had. He was in the medals. Only time would tell whether seven-time world champion and two-time two-man Olympic champion Francesco Friedrich with last year's winner Alexander Schuller would have enough. This is where he won his first World Championships in 2013 in the two-man, the youngest ever to do so, but he was staring defeat in the face. It wasn't the adductor strain he's been struggling with for the last month that let him down, it was his driving. Uncharacteristic errors creeping into every run. He took the lead from Vogt by just 100th with one sled to go. The final run was that of Johannes Lochner and Georg Fleischhauer. Paired together for the first time this season in two-man, they have not lost when they've raced together. A shattering third heat on the final day of competition from Lochner led him a long way ahead of his rivals, but the fourth was awful. By Hansi standards, hitting everything in sight. Luckily, with nearly 7/10 in the bank, he had plenty in sight, and for the first time in his career, he is a two-man world champion. Following in the footsteps of the great Christoph Langen, the last Bavarian to win, that was here in 2013, and his uncle Rudi Lochner, a two-man world champion in 1991. And on this most historic and beautiful of tracks, a historic event. For the first time ever, parasport athletes were competing in the World Championships at the same time and on the same venue as all their other counterparts in the sport. And they were first up in the second weekend. After a tight first day of racing, the battle for the medals was up for grabs. Latvia's Arturs Klots, a former two-time world champion, had been in sixth position overnight, disappointed with his first two runs, but he tidied things up in the third heat and going into the fourth was looking to move up the order. With near half a dozen race weekends in St. Moritz in his career that started back in 2011, he had plenty of experience to draw on. He was the 2017 world champion here and 2018 world champion in Lillehammer in Norway. A great final run put him comfortably into the lead, but most of his top rivals were yet to come. Among them, the USA's Will Castillo. He'd been in the bronze medal position overnight at the head of a tightly fought pack squabbling for the medals, but had slipped down with a disappointing third heat. The former US Army veteran, a Purple Heart medal winner, has been in great form, but like almost everybody else was brand new to the sleds. These new Bavarian-built monos had only been introduced the previous weekend in Innsbruck, and so everybody was getting to grips with them on the tricky St. Moritz track. And again, in the final heat, Castillo could not find the pace to hang on in front of Klotz, who remained in the leader's box. The most decorated of all parasliders, Canada's Lonnie Bissonnette. His first ever race weekend in these sleds, as he was not in Innsbruck the previous event. So learning the track and a brand new sled. But the veteran Canadian base jumper and wheelchair base jumper has plenty of knowledge to build on. 5th place after 3 runs, he was looking to hang on to that position and possibly move up the order. And as his knowledge of the sleds deepened, so his lines tidied. Best speed of all at the bottom. He wouldn't overhaul Artus Klotz in the leader's box, but he would be second at the line. Was it enough for a medal? Only the final sleds would dictate it. Second place overnight was Hermann Allmeyer of Austria. Never a World Championship medalist, he'd been 3rd fastest in the first heat and fastest of all in the second to close down the overnight leader. And then in the 3rd heat, Hermann took a 100th of a second advantage. Into the 4th run, it was all down to a 1-heat race between Allmeyer and Chris Stewart of Switzerland. Were there too many mistakes in the Austrian's run? Well, he had enough to narrowly take the lead over Artus Klotz, so he was guaranteed at least a silver medal. But was it enough for gold? Among the front runners, the last to go was Chris Stewart, the hometown hero. A relative newcomer to the sport, he only started in 2015 just for fun and became hooked. He lives nearby in St. Moritz, and so this is very much home territory for him. The overnight leader was pretty relaxed about a 2-heat race, maybe a little less so about a single heat race, trying to come from behind, good speed at the bottom, but not enough. He would be in 3rd place at the line. Hermann Allmeyer confirmed as the new world champion, Artus Klotz taking another silver medal, and Chris Stewart his first World Championship medal, a bronze, ahead of Lonnie Bissonnette, Will Castillo and Corey Mapp. The new Para-World Champion, Austria's Hermann Allmeyer. The women's bobsleigh competition started on Friday afternoon, the deciding runs on Saturday morning. Very different conditions for all of the athletes. The St. Moritz natural track is hand-built every season and always has a little variation or two. This year's is perhaps the toughest in 2 decades. Lara Nolte had crashed in training, survived day 1, but again, on day 2 of the competition, was caught out at Horseshoe, and a kilometre later, the sled came to a halt. She and brakewoman Nyla Skirter were okay, but badly shaken up and out of the competition. In the top group of sleds, France's Margot Bock and Carla Seneschal. 2 years earlier, in the last World Championships in Altenburg, they had finished in 15th place. Here, holding off the young junior world champion Germany's Maureen Zimmer, the French duo had not only improved their starts but dramatically increased their standing as well. A top 5 finish guaranteed, and that would satisfy the French government funding for another season. A great result from the French duo and their shocked coach Bruno Mijon. 4th place after 3 of the 4 heats, Switzerland's Melanie Hassler and Nadia Pasternak. Again, a 10-place improvement on their World Championship debut outing in Altenburg in 2021. Despite being at home in Switzerland, they have had precious few runs down the track in the warm weather this winter, and that gave them a little advantage over their rivals. Nevertheless, great runs from Melanie and big pushes with her brakewoman Nadia held them in the top half dozen all the way through. A great reward in their second World Championships outing. Fourth position overnight had been Kaylee Humphries and Keisha Love of the USA. They moved up to 3rd with Lara Nolte's crash in the 3rd heat, and Kaylee Humphries, a 2-time women's bobsleigh Olympic champion and 4-time world champion, is always a threat. Day 2 here in St. Moritz, and she was laying down another smoker. Guaranteed at least a bronze medal, She took her second of 4 World Championships here in 2013. Could she make it a 5th? She certainly did enough to pile the pressure on the remaining 2 drivers. With the US guaranteed at least 1 medal, would the 2 German drivers who were at the top of the pile crack? Lisa Buchwitz had led overnight by 500ths of a second, came into the final heat 600ths back. She had an early advantage over Kaylee Humphries, and good speed in the forest would keep that alive. It wasn't error-free, but it was good enough to guarantee herself at least a silver medal. And it would pile the pressure on Kim Kilicki, her teammate, who was waiting at the start. Lisa guaranteed herself her first ever World Championship medal in her first full season as a driver. Kim Kilicki and Leonie Fiebig were the last sled on ice with a slender advantage after 3 heats. Kilicki, the silver medalist in Altenburg 2020 and 2021, had a shot at the gold. It would be her or Buchwitz to become a first-time world champion for Germany. The gap grew, it shrank. It grew again. It was never into double digits. It was going to be unbelievably close. Kilicki had just enough in the final corners, and across the line, she was the new world champion by 500ths of a second over 4 runs of this 1,850-metre track. An unbelievably tiny margin. Gold for Kim Kilicki and Leonie Fiebig ahead of Lisa Buchwitz, Kira Lipperheider and Kaylee Humphries and Keisha Love. The champagne and the tears flowed for the new world champions. The final event, perhaps the biggest of all, the Königsklasse, the blue ribbon, the 4-man bobsleigh. As ever, plenty of candidates in the battle for the medals. Switzerland's Mikkel Vogt, already a bronze medalist in the 2-man a week earlier, looking to try and improve on his top 6 position after the first 3 heats. He'd had the 4th fastest run in the first heat, but a disappointing second run on day 1 dropped him back down the order, and he was fighting his way back. Taps down the bottom of the track didn't rob him of enough speed to slow him down, and he came into the leader's box with 5 sleds remaining. A big personal best result for Mikkel Vogt, and he was still the leader as we got to the top 4. Newly crowned 2-man world champion Johannes Lochner. With his crew, they'd had top 3 starts, but a flaky first day saw him 3rd and 5th fastest, and then he skidded more time away with a 7th fastest 3rd run. It was time to steady the ship, and he did. The gap over Mikkel Vogt holding steady midway down the run. Closing in on the finish line, he had enough speed in hand to guarantee himself a top 4 position and maybe a shot at a medal. But somebody else would have to give it away. The top 3, and an unusual man in the frame for the medals, Emil Tsipoulis of Latvia, the 27-year-old in his first full season of World Cup sliding, his first World Championships in the 4-man sled, and he had been exemplary. The veteran starting crew behind him providing him with great acceleration. He had never been slower than 5th fastest and was fastest of all in the 3rd of the 4 heats, putting himself right in the frame. Long skid at the fastest part of the track at over 85 miles an hour, took a little bit of speed away, but at the line they knew they were in the medals, much to the delight of their veteran coach Sandis Prusis. An unbelievably calm performance from Emil Tsipoulis, and that might pile the pressure on the remaining 2 sleds. Brad Hall of Great Britain has had 3 gold medals this season in the 4-man World Cup racing and 2 silvers out of 6 starts. 100th behind Francesco Friedrich in the first heat. Friedrich opened the gap to 2/10 overnight. Brad brought it down to just 800s into the final run, but skids at the top of the track, taps on the firm ice walls, all bringing speed out of the sled. He did not have the smooth run that he'd had first and third time down the St. Moritz track. Nevertheless, it was good enough to take the lead with 1 to go, and a first 4-man World Championship medal for Great Britain since 1939. Jubilation from the Latvians. It was a dead heat. Would we have a 3-way tie for gold? Francesco Friedrich only had 800s over Brad Hall of Great Britain after 3 runs, but his boys ripped off an astonishing new start record at the beginning, and Friedrich steadied the ship. His second heat and his fourth heat were both top draw, and in the final run he absolutely raced away from the opposition, the greatest bobsledder in history, breaking the track record with the very final run yet again to take his 5th consecutive World Championship gold by nearly 7/10 of a second. 2-man might have eluded him, but 4-man gold went to Francesco Friedrich from joint silver medalists Brad Hall and Emil Sapoulis. A fantastic fortnight of racing on the oldest, most historic and the only natural track on the planet, St. Moritz in Switzerland. The World Championships are done, but there are still 2 more World Cup weekends to decide the destiny of the Crystal Globes.